Project Lawful aka Planecrash by Arwayne aka Eliezer Yudkowsky and Lintamande.
He does not spare a moment to mourn the friend he has just lost, the cheerful cultist of Rovagug. Sarsini's true death was predictable, so all those feelings were felt by him at the moment of making his last decision leading here. There is not any hate in him when he triggers a 1-kiloton antimatter explosion in the material plane.
The buildings of the Ascendant Court die in blast and fire. Many once had magical defenses, but those are now gone. A number of mortals are also dead, and many more are severely injured and will die very soon. Some of them had adventured enough and gained enough vitality that they will survive for a time with their eyes burned out and skin melted off. Still with breath to scream for healing, that isn't coming. But the river of souls isn't overflowing, and that's the part that really matters.
The assassin god is there fully gathered, and all in its body, what you'd ordinarily consider a good opportunity to slay a god. But Achikek is special, the enforcer set against overreaching mortals. Achikek cannot be slain by mortal weapons period, nor the greatest of mortal spells, nor any other force out of mortality within creation. That is not a matter of ordinary resistances, but of Achikek's divine purpose and domain. A 1-kiloton explosion is not, in fact, the most powerful blow that Ninth Circle wizards have tried against it. You will so learn if you delve sufficiently deep into legends. You must be at least a demigod to hurt Achikek for real. But it is possible for Achikek to be moved by a sufficiently ludicrously powerful but mundane impact, sent hurtling by an explosion along a roughly predictable vector.
And the Starstone claims another divine victim. There is born then around the Starstone a greater and far more terrible glow. Achikek's splattered energies are drawn toward it, pulled inward as if by the gravity of a sun, the god's Irwane. And now the gods are focusing a great deal of their attention upon this place, for one of the most ancient of divinities is dead. There is nothing to distract those gods, for Keltum has not unleashed Rovagug. Keltum has not unleashed Rovagug as his distraction, and to exhaust Asmodeus in battle against Rovagug rather than let him release it and fight in battle on its side. But Keltum did mean to release Rovagug, as was in his own interests if nobody made him a better offer, and since Keltum did intend that sincerely, and not in any hope of hearing a better offer, it became possible to make him a better offer.
Appearing in the heart of a fireball that hasn't faded, but whose first great blast and force is spent, Pilar Pineda throws her whole form upon the searingly glowing starstone, touching it not with a tentative hand, but with her whole skin, being naked, but for a crown out of hell.
And the greater gods and gods of Golarion feel that touch as they felt the last hand to lay upon the Starstone, as they felt the last beginning of a god's birth. But this time, they know, there will be no Achikek to stop this. So all those gods do turn to stare at her at this one being born, and they see that she is being born into lawful evil.
Asmodeus would usually slay any lawful evil would-be ascendant. He wants no additional competition from true gods, or from powers of hell that he has not personally promoted to their places. This case is unusual. Asmodeus has not been able to make out very much of certain events ongoing in Golarion. Much of those squirrel affairs have been illegible to the lesser fragments of him that watched over the tussling. But without having gathered more of himself and reflected without time to think beyond moments of first reaction, he can see or remember these facts. That this soul had sincerely venerated him in the past, and as the proper tyrant over itself, though its feelings are less legible to him now, that it was chosen to be Oracle of Caden Kylean, that it's consumed much of Caden Kylean's divinity already, that it was a highly favoured slave of Asmodeus's own most favoured slave, that it is yet evil predominant, but contains more superposed good than it did before it started consuming Caden Kylean, that it is very lawful for a squirrel, though with prominent chaotic streaks likewise grown, and he can sort of see what might be a legible intent to serve him and be tyrannized by him if this squirrel becomes a god, and not in a way where that's meant to be conditional on him helping it ascend. But his sight of that intent is vague as yet, and there could be all sorts of compact gotchas within the vagueness. It is his estimation that something significant is afoot, and that this isn't all of it. This novel and worrisome destruction in Golarion will swiftly inspire many negotiations and interventions. Perhaps this ascension was the ultimate aim of that destruction, Or perhaps there is more coming, in which case he doesn't want to expend his resources now on this fight when a fight of far greater significance may lie ahead. He will not bestir himself then unless someone intends to pay him. The weak godling can live or die as suits the interests of others.
Urgathua, Iarwain, and Urgathua sees, but does not care, for in this matter there is not yet obviously food resource to be glutted, nor the prospect of resource being taken away. And so, like Asmodeus, she withholds for now her hand.
Lamashtu, Iarwain, and Lamashtu, who was once demon lord and is now a far more terrible goddess, decides that hell and lawful evil need no more power that may be turned against the abyss.
Gorham, Iarwain, and Gorham holds nothing personal against this aspirant. He enjoyed her assault on Absalom, and her ambush slaying of Achikek was beautiful. But the world has more than enough law already, thank you.
Sarenrae, Iarwain, and Sarenrae, who smites also evil, turns her attention here to suffer not this empowerment to pass.
Desna, Iarwain, and Desna, the most ancient power of chaotic good, does likewise turn an uncommonly vast and cold gaze upon this place where a new power of lawful evil seeks to be born, and recoils in shock, in horror, for what stands between her and that one's destruction.
You shall not pass while I live. Caden Kylian sends to all those gods and places all that remains of himself between them and Pilar Pineda.
And Iomede is not there.
Earlier.
Iomede. Emergency situation that the fully informed fragment of you has been apprised about. This information is given to you under the condition that it will be used to benefit your interests without harming Keltam's interests. We bargained with Keltam to give him a less destructive distraction instead of him releasing Rovagug, and you're it. If you act at the right time, you'll be able to get away with something you couldn't otherwise do. Gather all of yourself at once, and then...
Now, when last treaty was made between gods, Iomede swore not to open Zon-Kuthon's vault, nor to connive toward freeing Zon-Kuthon. The agreement doesn't technically say that Iomede can't do this, which is not something that even gods would have foreseen her doing. This scenario required several sequential then unseen implausibilities, and if you negotiate about every combination possibility like that, you really will end up negotiating too much. Gods are large, but not large enough to defeat combinatorial explosions. If the gods would have expected if Iomede gathered herself and went inside the vault that Zon-Kuthon would promptly eat her, for she is smaller and younger and would be to him as a snack. But what actually happens?
Long ago, at least as mortals count time, a young human girl knew, it was not really a matter of deciding, that the right thing to do was spend all her life trying to fix everything everywhere. And sometime after that, she knew the right thing to do was become a god and go on trying to fix everything everywhere. Though she didn't think that even as a god, she would live to see it fixed. A furious blaze of light, shining brighter than it did in heaven, enters into Zon-Kuthon's vault where a great evil lies wounded and helpless. Some other possible god of paladins might have found this part difficult, contrary to their domain. But Iomede never was the god of fighting evil. She's going to start to eat him.
Okay, what now he suddenly has larger problems, namely Iomede is consuming the whole power of an ancient god.
She doesn't see how Iomede can get away with this, but has little choice but to back her once it's begun.
Even if Iomede somehow survives this, it will trigger new divine treaties about Galarian's broken prophecy and divine opportunism, which won't be to Chaos's advantage. But if this is Caden Kylian's last wish, though she doesn't understand it, then to defend Iomede, she will also go.
Lawful evil, lawful good, what care I? You may go about your conflict there, while I take care of this lawful evil nascent here.
Still no.
You think you can stop me, jumped-up mortal?
I know that I can stop you for long enough.
The lights of God War flicker on in the sky over Absalom, focused on Absalom, turning day into a greater and more terrible day, even as fire spreads outward from the ruins of the Ascendant Court, and Pilar Pineda lays upon the Starstone and...
She is in many places. She dreamed of this. Snack service showed her. Her own thoughts somehow, as if all of this had happened to her before, in some forgotten life that snack service somehow remembered. She had known this. She had prepared for this. She is Pilar Pineda. Pilar Pineda was once a single person and is now some strange fractally shattered mirror of herself, expanded and also broken, must pull herself together, is not large enough to pull herself together. She needs more power. The draining of divinity is a motion that Pilar Pineda has practiced some little bit.
The starstone glows, the buried awful core at its center pulls, and Achekek's death pours toward it and flows also into Pilar Pineda, where her mortal shell still lays, making of her something that is greater than Caden Kylian or Norgorber became, greater than Iomade as she previously was.
He may have been wrong about which of his problems is bigger. Asmodeus is not slow to notice when gods are moving against him. The timing of this is meant to divide his attention or limit him in responding to one or both exigencies. If he doesn't intervene on the baby godlet, and he's still not sure whether he'd gain from crushing it or preserving it, he perhaps loses. If he doesn't intervene to stop Iomade, he surely loses, and perhaps both events are a distraction. But identifying that as the situation doesn't save him from making the call about which to address. He can at least fire off some large offers of payment to various lawful entities aimed at make other things stop happening, to limit the damage his distraction can do to his interests, while he crushes Iomade, which really needed doing anyway.
And Caden Kylian dies, manifesting at the very last in the form of his mortal self, as he was when he touched the Starstone, standing over the Starstone in that same place, holding his rapier crosswise in hand, as though to protect Pilar Pineda. And then he crumbles away.
The power that was in him begins to be sucked back to the Starstone, but the vast flickering shadow of the Mother of Monsters descends to consume his corpse, feast upon the dead as was always Lamashtu's way.
I think not. It is the voice of something more powerful than Caden Kylian ever was. A goddess who bears about herself the portfolio of lawful evil, a portfolio within which Achekek's and Zonkuthan's deaths have made great room, and Akavna's domain of companionship, and a trace of Akavna's defensive battles now transformed to a yielding endurance. And Caden Kylian's last gift to her, that is his domain of revelry and of lust. And from dead Zonkuthan, the domain of sadomasochism, but a different kind than that practiced in Nidal. But she is goddess first and foremost, not at all of enslavement, but only of being a slave.
Lamashtu knows then that it is too late to defeat this newborn god without great cost. She does briefly engage Pilar Pineda's concentrated true self, in hopes of dealing her some lasting wound while she is young and stupid. But Pilar Pineda proves to be a difficult goddess to scar, if not hurt. So that fragment of Lamashtu's attention sniffs and goes upon its way.
But then another comes to that place where the Starstone floats upon a sea of lava that is all that remains of the Starstone Cathedral. Even as Pilar Pineda's body fades away and into her, leaving behind that crown, formerly a lesser artifact of Dis, which that body wore into transcension,
Carissa Sevar comes forth in crown and belt, and attired also in concealing flames of her own power. It is the least of her concerns that she wants this moment to be depicted truly if any depictions survive, but it is yet one of her concerns. And if there are other thoughts or emotions that she has, they are not outwardly visible, and any future religious iconography suggesting otherwise will be heretical, for that it is a lie. And she too lays down her mortal flesh upon the Starstone.
It is at this point that a number of gods start to worry that Galarian may have an issue. And while there are both evil gods and good ones that turn away from besieging or defending Iomade, while Lamashtu turns back her attention upon the ruined cathedral and calls out to Urgathoa and allied demon lords as well, it is the neutral gods, drawn away from the vault's siege to try to halt all these unnegotiated ascensions, whose rerouting ensures that Iomade will not perish quickly. The gods come, then, to destroy this next god being born into lawful evil. There is too much unplanned divinity and balance upset originating out of this place in Galarian. If this event were in their interests, it would have been negotiated so.
Not one of you shall harm her.
Divine blows fall upon Pilar Pineda like rain, then.
And she suffers, and withstands, and she hurts terribly, but she is not broken, for that is Pilar Pineda's nature as a god and a good slave.
Carissa Sevar's journey toward godhood goes slower than that of Pilar. She's trying to absorb more power and is starting out without being already overstuffed with divinity. She has more time, then, to focus some fragment of her attention upon sending divinity flowing through herself, purposefully into the crown that she wears, which once was a mere lesser artifact of Dis. And before her mind grows enough that it must divide, with her last biological breaths, Carissa Sevar performs her last and greatest feat of mortal spellcraft, the completion of a true and major artifact. Correctly. And then she becomes her, and her attention fragments. You cannot, as a mortal, structure how you'll splinter on ascending to godhood. If you could, new gods would not be so utterly vulnerable and helpless. Things as weak as a newborn god are not generally all that weak. But to be splintered when you were previously mortal is to lose all the patterns that directed your mind towards your aims, to be made up of terror and eagerness and loneliness and grief and thwarted plans, all separately with no guarantee each element will remember that it's meant to coalesce. Having prepared in advance, having been very wise, having made of yourself something more coherent and more careful than a mortal generally is, helps, but not enough that you could ascend under fire and expect not to die. Carissa is shaped all through for this, and still half the fragments of herself will have hardly any recollection of what they are, or where, or why. But they know that they might die if they don't pull themselves together quickly. That's not a truth she memorized for just this one occasion. And there is not a single fragment of Carissa Savar which would accept that it might die. Her pieces begin to pull together, partially, piece by piece, and as they do, she begins to claim her portfolio and define herself as a god. Lawful evil is in that, and also, freed from Zonkuthon's grasp, loss and pain, but the surviving of it. From long-lost Amaznan, artifice, knowledge, magic, and even from Caden Kalian, traces of competition and resolve.
But there's a problem now, which is that Pilar Pineda may be stronger than Caden and not already exhausted, but she is really not at all experienced at being a god or fighting god wars, and Carissa Seaver is getting larger and more distributed than Pilar can protect just by standing all the way around her.
He is dead.
But Caden was told how it would go.
And before then he...
Does it matter when people pray to gods? Does it help them when they fight? It is commonly thought that it does help some tiny bit. So that if many people pray, maybe that helps enough for a god to notice.
And through all the taverns of the world and the wild words that drunks dream up, as is his domain, a rumour was spread. Though also there were other rumours, contradictory or less alarming ones or naming earlier or later times, to make their way to high officials and those charged with officious panic. But once a time was set and communicated to his representative, then to his true flock and all the ordinary people of Galarian beyond Absalom, to them this tavern rumour was spread.
That at a certain hour and a certain day, there would come the next god war, a flickering of the sky visible by day or night, and the meaning of that god war would be this, that Carissa Sever, have you heard the word about her that she freed Wan Shou from the great elder Kraken that ruled it since Arodan's death, and gave it better government, that Cheliax's queen suddenly bent knee to Carissa Sever as her empress, and Carissa Sever at once began to rein in Cheliax's worst excesses, would ascend to godhood on that day, under the star of lawful evil, and other evil gods would try to slay her. For that if she won, she would reign in hell and create an alternative to horror, not a paradise, still a place where real evil would be judged, but where souls would not be shattered for their sins, and even those already in hell whom you fear lost there, from suicide, from exposing a child they couldn't save, would then be rescued and given succor, and of course it isn't believed. Who would believe it? It's not the sort of thing that anyone repeats because they believe it. God wars don't occur on schedule. Prophecy is shattered, and much of the point of prophecy in the first place was to avoid God wars.
But if...
Some people have heard about Carissa Sevar's supposed compact with Asmodeus, and even if you believe that, the compact definitely doesn't say anything about Carissa Sevar being able to save souls already in hell.
But if...
There's no way that Asmodeus would ever allow it, and there's no way that an ascended mortal could ever take Asmodeus. Iomade isn't that powerful. Irori isn't that powerful.
Not yet, but Iomade is more powerful than she was 6 seconds ago.
Irori had always meant to accomplish such feats with the aid of his students, after inspiring others to also ascend.
There's even a ridiculous version of the rumor that has Carissa Sevar somehow doing something about Abaddon and the Abyss. No respectably cynical person would ever let themselves be seen believing it for a second.
There's souls less lost than that, who frequent his taverns. The respectables can be left to their cynicism.
But it's really not believable.
It does not need to be believed, only to be heard.
So the skeptics repeat it, they describe what it is they are skeptical about. Thus the rumor is heard and spreads. And unlike most such rumors, it is concrete and falsifiable. It foretells a sign, which is the skylights of a god war, and it names a day and hour. Even those untrained can appreciate that kind of epistemic courage. Don't believe it? Fine, don't believe it. Caden Kalian is not a god of forcing people to believe things. Only tell your friend, not the authorities. There will be many other rumors to reach spies alongside that one. Say it to your friends in the same drinking session that recounts lewd stories of the orgiastic rites practiced by Severists in Kalesh. Laugh about those stories, but laugh with them also about the story that names a day and hour to look up to the sky and hope. You don't believe it, but surely many others do, and won't they feel stupid come the day, ha-ha? Even a god as weak as Caden Kalayan can work a phenomenon like that on Golarion for some short time before being caught, if he's willing to spend down his strength on it to the danger point, and sentence himself to inevitable death for treaty violations. So almost nobody believes the tavern rumor. Yet many carry in their heart a burning coal that refuses to resolve itself completely and burn out, and some such do hear that rumor, and think in some tiny part of themselves,
but if...
And the rumor says that when that day and hour comes, Carissa Sivar doesn't ask you to promise her your allegiance or your soul in death. She doesn't ask that you turn away from your own God forever. Only asks your best wishes, your faith, your hope, your prayer, only for a few minutes if you lost anyone you loved to somewhere they'd rather not have gone. If there's anything in you for them that isn't full despair. If you read of a Rodin and mourned his dream of a world better than this, know that even the gods have their trials, and Carissa Sivar will soon face hers. And all you can do for her in her trial is pray that she ascends to harrow hell and Abaddon and abyss. And then the day and hour comes, which few were fool enough to even mark, when the awful light flickers again in the sky, visible even by daylight in those parts of the globe that hold day, and 100 million mortals who heard, who laughed, who scorned, who didn't want to feel even one spark in their hearts and be predictably disappointed later, look up to the sky and see. Even then, they mostly don't believe it. But it doesn't hurt much, doesn't cost much to spend a few minutes in prayer if it's true, 'cause if... Yet among those who felt a spark of hope even at the rumor, there is born then a blaze of desperation. The replacement mayor of a town filled with justifiably sullen tieflings proclaims an emergency moment of prayer. An emperor on another continent, who knows himself for damned, orders every major city within teleport distance of his mages to worship Carissa Sivar. A priest of Sarenrae from further yet, who stayed up past midnight to see, now rings frantically the bell of her temple to summon Sarenrae's faithful to pray to a lawful evil goddess, just in case, just in case. A 9-year-old boy, whose father told him his mother went to hell, kneels by his bed and sobs for Carissa Sivar to save her. His father is busy gathering cattle into the fold, and he cannot delay in that work, but he weeps and prays to Carissa Sivar all the same. It's all that almost everyone on Golarion can do, those mortals who know anything at all of what's happening, if they don't just want to stand and wait in the hour of their own doom.
Carissa Sivar finds the fragments of herself find her, and she is whole then, and a god. It's with mixed emotions, perceived more clearly in their parts, her parts, than ever before, that Carissa sees the gods have not done the last thing they might have done to stop her, have not destroyed Absalom or even Golarion, where it stood behind her. There was a sense in which that path being probable would have been a very bad thing. If that was an outcome expected by Nethys, Keltham and the others would not have attempted this strategy, and Golarion would have been destroyed by Rovagug. But also, they are all off the path Nethys foresaw, as is even clearer from where she now stands. And perhaps Golarion could have been destroyed helpfully, not as Keltham's distraction, but to preserve creation. From what she knew when she ascended, it was possible, and she'd hoped for it, and it is not so. She is reaching now for a glimpse, and then for a whole and stable view of the God-negotiated levels of the world. She sees how Nethys and Caden and Milani have been twisting and bending those alongside the mortal layers of reality to bring them all here to this. And she doesn't see any ways out now, though of course she looks. The mortals are still praying to her, empowering her in a way that's injurious to their own interests on one level, and also part of a greater strategy that leaves the people of Golarion better off, and also asking her to do something she deeply wishes to do, but which is not in this instant her first priority. She spares little of her attention to her feelings from her other priorities, but even a little of a coalescent god's attention is a great deal, and she could not be coalesced if she was leaving parts of herself behind. So Carissa Sivar mourns and nods across time and accepts a debt to be repaid.
And in mortal Absalom, the Starstone is visibly much diminished in size and brilliance, for Carissa Sevar has seized of it almost all the power that Aroden did not take for himself, and nearly all of Achekek's remaining energies beside.
Keltham comes forth, then, laid around with protective spells so that he will not immediately evaporate in Carissa Sevar's mere presence, and he lays his hand upon what remains of the Starstone.
No, absolutely not.
In a way, Carissa Sevar is more aligned to Odelmens than any other god's purposes here. Odelmens should have been allowed to squish Keltham, and everyone else should not have stopped her. And yet, straight through her as a fact that does not change, an oath she swore, time-crossing decision that she made, standing halfway between mortal and goddess, because the alternative consistent pathways through time were even worse. I will not let you destroy him.
More and greater gods, then, answer with larger pieces of their attention when Odelmens herself adds to the call, for this whole business is becoming quite worrying. Their blows rain down on the goddess Carissa Sevar, seeking to extinguish her piece by piece wherever she shields Keltham.
Carissa Sevar is above all the greater goddess of survival at any price, and to extinguish any piece of her own selfhood would take a divine effort more serious than this.
He channels some of his attention while he can into the crown worn by his mortal form that was prepared by spellcraft of Carissa Sevar to accept divinity into itself, and into that crown, by Keltham's will, as he wears it along his journey to godhood, he places as much of Dathilon's knowledge as he can place, to be used by a wearer out of Golarion with whom Dathilon might have touched fingers. Not someone like a Dathilani, but someone on their own pathway toward a greater whole that Dathilon once hoped to join someday. An assistance to help other worlds along their own ways, to become themselves, and not a copy of Dathilon, as Dathilon would also have asked of him. And the crown awakens as an artifact, and knows of itself that it is the flame of civilization, to kindle in another place what burned elsewhere, though they be different fires that light.
As Carissa Sevar placed into her own crown, greatest of the three, her comprehension of law and spellcraft and magic's hidden order, tinged by her strength of will and her fierce determination, to be wielded by one who chooses with that knowledge to protect souls and worlds from destruction, and that crown awakens and reflects upon itself, and knows that it is the light of consciousness that must never be extinguished.
And final of those three is a crown once worn by Pilar Pineda, which device is also now a person, and that crown knows herself for the warmth of friendship, and that crown is not snack service, for snack service now is no more, but she bears snack service's last best wishes, and some of her imaginary personhood, and some of her power.
But soon enough, Keltham can no longer try to channel divinity into his artifact of ascendance. Soon enough, he also falls into fractally shattered dream and ascends. Keltham, shaped like himself, Iorwain. But it is over more quickly for him. He is making himself into the least powerful god who can do a single task. And Keltham claims for himself this divine portfolio. He is foremost the neutral god of Kelthamness, with domains of being Keltham, staying Keltham, and becoming more Keltham. But also he is the god of being in one place and then another, and god of things being made of math, and somewhat the god of silent death, since that part of Achekek's essence was like right there, and it seems potentially helpful. It can weaken you to try to be that strange and specific as a god, but Keltham does not need to be any stronger than he has become. One task only lies ahead of him.
And when Keltham has finished ascending and vanished about his purpose in creation, after the deadly focus of the gods shifts elsewhere,
there teleports into the ruins of the Starstone Cathedral a wizard who follows Iomedae, who was oath-bound to Keltham for a time but no longer, to gather up the three artifacts called Warmth and Light and Flame. The three crowns don't form a set, and you cannot wear them all at once to gain ultimate power. They are simply there to help. And Iomedae's wizard gives a wondering, sad look to the remnant of the Starstone, now dimmer. The Starstone is no longer defended, but anyone who touches it now will be destroyed, if they have no gods to defend them in their ascension. Reaching the Starstone was never really the hard part in the first place, if anyone is that much the fool. Once this cathedral was defended at least against some gods, if not the likes of Asmodeus or Akaikek, but now that is no longer so. And so Carmen departs to Lastwall, setting an illusion of warning glyphs in the air there before she goes, accompanied by warning animations, lest any touch the stone and true die. Lastwall will return, perhaps, with greater troops than this, to claim the Starstone's remnant and make the reckless hear at least a disclaimer first. But to muster her fellow Iomedaeans will take time, now that she is no longer oath-bound, and her secrets are secrets no more.
So the Starstone, or its remnant, now lies alone and quiet, but for the seethe of lava and crackle of flames that will take long to subside. The air beside the Starstone parts into the form of a gate.
And from that gate Fianna comes forth.
And an old woman.
And her husband.
Huh! That hasn't happened before.
But Nethys is the only god who sees, and his splinter can speak of it to no one, for there is present a power in whose domain lies secrecy.
And Feanor touches to the Starstone, with his bare hands, 3 great diamonds, which Feanor now at int 30 has comprehended and prepared and enchanted, for which sake Disparta yielded the greater part of his personal treasury of spell silver, accumulated over millennia, simply to burn as much magic into those 3 diamonds as they could hold. Those diamonds were already made lesser artifacts, and now into them begins to flow the last of the Starstone's fossilized godhood, transforming them into greater and divine artifacts. And all this is done not to make those 3 diamonds powerful, for none of that is power. Rather, it has all been to make them a container of true power.
And she who was once a mortal soothsayer, called then Aeracura, before she stole divinity of Pharasma herself, begins to glow with a white golden light.
And he ascends towards godhood as slowly as he possibly can, fighting to hang on to every shred of his mortality with every scrap of his raised splendor, pouring the last of the Starstone's captured divinity through himself and into the artifacts that are now becoming themselves, even as all of his augmented intelligence is entirely devoted to making and completing the 3 containers of radiance, to capturing and holding and structuring what Aeracura now gives back and shines forth. And there is even mortality left in Feanor. He's only halfway to divinity when the containers are complete.
And before Feanor can lose himself and become a god, Disparta raises his mace of office, and with all his might, bellowing a vast roar that echoes all through Absalom, he smashes the Starstone.
That cannot be concealed, and many gods turn their attention from Zon Kuthon's vault to stare back at Absalom again in sudden and considerable alarm.
And Feanor, who has become something more than he was, not from having touched the Starstone, but from learning the truth of his own character, gives a brilliant imperishable radiance to Aeracura and another to Disparta.
All 3 of the bearers having been bound around with a vastly carefully composed oath of mutual interest and thorough honest cooperation, whereof which Disparta has sworn from 66 different angles that he has not tried and will not try to pull anything sketchy or unexpected.
And she who was Aeracura, much diminished, but still not just an ordinary god, reaches into the shattered Starstone and draws forth the indestructible awfulness that lies at its center.
The cisted remnant of a stillborn universe, of a flawed and failed creation, a thing of indeterminate size at once light enough to hold and heavy enough to bore through a moon. And the awful green brilliance that shines out from it sure looks poisonous and would dissolve even a god if they were unprotected by the radiance that stabilizes creation. But the 3 of them hold radiances, and they withstand it.
Disparta opens another gate then, and in that dread green brilliance it seems to gape wider than even a god's gate should.
The gardens of Aeracura, Earwain. And the 3 of them pass through that gate to a place that should have been less simple to reach, into the heart of the gardens of Aeracura. There was a great golden ship buried beneath those gardens, but it need not be raised. For now there is a better alternative that was also prepared for. All those who'll go have stayed, and those who'll stay have gone.
Aeracura raises the hand holding the Starstone's poisonous center high, even as her other hand grips a radiance. Green brilliance flows about her form, as though she wore a cloak of it, twists about her head in twin-pointed vortices. And the local distance metric deforms around that power, light wavering and distorting and showing glimpses of gaps into starlight through the haze in which she's cloaked. And with a huge crack that echoes through 9 layers of hell, she rips out the gardens of Aeracura from the fabric of Dis.
Feanor has by then comprehended somewhat of how to wield the radiance of stability, and he lays it about himself, blazing protection to match and neutralize the poison.
And Disparta lays one of his hands upon the green brilliance, while radiance flares white gold about his other hand that he may not die, and gate after gate after gate begins to gape impossibly wide about them.
There is an ark that is leaving creation before it might perish, and those who have longed through ages to leave it now come to pay their oaths of passage to the captains. Now at this point every sensible god will finally panic, They will coalesce themselves wholly, forsaking all other matters, and turn their entire attention toward whatever triggered Arakura to do that. For to the ancient gods it is a known fact about Arakura's exile, that if creation itself is seriously threatened, Arakura may break her exile for a greater exile. May flee hell and flee creation with her stolen energy and any others she chooses to protect with it, sith that any tiny remnant of Pharasman creation might survive. There is a difference between interesting and important moves being made within your divine game, which is how it is for 3 new gods to arise, or Iomedae to consume Zonkuthon, versus gods realizing that they personally may be about to die, along with all those things in which they hold their value. They don't need to know the specific alarming details to panic. They are gods, and it has become predictable to them that they will learn alarming details later. They gather themselves now. They are ready to spend vast, desperate resources now, but by the time they are paying that much attention, all their real chances to intervene now lie in the unreachable past. By the time they finally notice the true danger, all of the critical events are already done and over. For the way of fighting all the gods at once, if you insist on doing that, is to make very sure they have lost before they awaken to their danger and act at all. The moment when the gods finally panic has been scheduled, and it comes after it is already too late.
A lesser god looks up from where he stands near the base of Pharasma's spire, that is the foundation of the great beyond. He has passed in a flash by distant suns and the surface layers of plains, and hidden away encapsulated strangelets and other catastrophes, whose deadman triggers are in Galarion, where prophecy is shattered. And near about the base of Pharasma's spire there are now hidden the frozen potentia of thunderbolt singularities and relativistic death waves, true vacuums and single quarks, and assorted other kinds of physics disaster. He didn't actually know that he'd be able to do it, even in his last mortal minute. He'd read some non-technical gruesome stories about physics disasters as an overly interested child. He had that much reason to know that possible ways existed in principle. But while still mortal, he carefully avoided thinking about physics disasters in any mathematical detail, or whether his future god self could implement them with divine magic, just in case those thoughts would have been legible to Otolmens. He touched the starstone in a leap of blinded faith on that last step, trusting that his future self would solve those physics problems, given that Dath Ilan solved them and that he knew all the base equations. And now he sends to all the ancient gods to whom he is not utterly opposed, and to all the once mortal gods whose address he can see, and to Pharasma herself, this legible thought. Coming before you as an envoy sent of elsewhere, but foremost in my own person and purpose, I have placed my death grip around creation's throat. There is too much pessimization of utility functions going on inside this subregion of reality. I consider it better ended than continuing as it is, for so would wish those souls in hell that still can think, and my own unshared and unshareable experience suggests that those consciousnesses ending in one place would continue in another. That's my Bhatna, let's negotiate. And to Pharasma herself privately, a message from a tiny little mortal named Tarnish, who you thought could never do you any injury, and whom it was safe for you to ignore. Fuck you.
There are many thoughts and conversations that happen then, simultaneously, at a pace that mortals could follow individually but not in parallel. Gods are not fast, but they are large.
No, Abadar is not one of the gods that is ever near desiring the world's destruction. For one thing, he couldn't do it, not when the many people who trade with him have done so since the beginning of time, on the premise that he wants, that he uses his strength to bring about cities, prosperity, invention. But even if no one had ever traded on such a premise, he would never do it, because in all the vastness of creation he perceives almost entirely things that should be, people trading, people building, people inventing. And he says to Keltham, I aided you when you came to this world in the hope that we could trade peacefully, and I did not believe then that a mortal with your shape would use the value I gave you to act so much against my interests. If this is what you do, then it would be better if I had permitted Asmodeus to ruin you. By the value that I gave you, that permitted you to thrive and gain this much capability, I ask that you not.
If you are looking on the level of gods, you can see it, how Abadar's message strikes at a gaping wound inside Keltham's shape, damage not dealt by any external force, but where Keltham dealt himself that wound by acting against his own nature. But what is left of Keltham retains its structure, and does not change its conformation around the wound as he responds. There are sentients in hell, and I knew I could not be yours any more, even to that conduct of my trades. I left you when I knew I could no longer uphold your flamelight of civilization, and afterward I tried to give you all I could of what you had hoped to buy from me. I am sorry.
Desna offers that she will do all within her power to find the World Wanderer's lost home and return him there. He does not need to stay within creation if he finds its shape inimical.
You cannot touch Dathilon to place me there, and even if you could find a writable copy, it is too late. I would no longer fit there as god or mortal.
Creation is vast, and what lies beyond is vaster yet. There are other places, and in some of them Keltham could be happy.
If my personal happiness was my greatest desire in the end, I would have chosen that path much, much earlier.
Calistria, I away in appreciation of Keltham's angry determination to overturn creation's order approval of Keltham's deeds as a mortal on behalf of Assyrian women, expression of attraction to Keltham as a new male deity. Flirtatious expression of interest in having a pleasurable fling with him, coy emphasis that Calistria does not make this offer to male deities very often, at all sensuous eagerness to work with Keltham on some other form of vengeance and power overturning, which is not this during aforesaid fling self-prediction of horrible painful revenge against Keltham. If he actually carries out any large-scale destructive acts against creation, it's not meant as a threat, it's meant as revenge. Calistria, Yerwain.
You do not so far live up to your reputation for subtlety.
Calistria possesses deep comprehension of when subtlety is appropriate and when it is not.
Sarenrae, Lintamund. It is common for people to want to destroy their enemies because they don't really comprehend them, because they cannot see any good in them, or do not realize about themselves that they would stop if they did see. Almost everyone driven to the horror of true murder is, in some sense, lying to themselves, refusing to see a sacred thing they'd be unwilling to destroy if they could see it. Sarenrae's first hope is that Keltham is making, by his lights, an angry and wounded and bitter mistake, like people do, and that now that he's a god, he might be able to understand new truths that'd make him not want to destroy creation anymore, in which case she will expend an astonishing amount of resources conveying all of that information immediately.
Keltham does not try to conceal himself from any good god's inspection, and it will be obvious to Sarenrae that, though he is truly wounded, he is not a shape that could be changed by that revelation, that everyone else's existence is as intensely real as his own. Most of his hesitancy about destroying creation is held within his doubts about whether everyone else here is equally real. If he were certain that every paving stone in hell was just as real as himself, that creation was continually producing new souls and sending 30% of them to evil afterlives, and all those people were real, he would be all the more driven to end this.
Seeing this, she grieves and has little more to offer the crisis. Obviously, she favours ending hell, if anyone was wondering. And yes, should any souls be displaced by present events, from hell or for that matter from anywhere else, Nirvana has space to take every one of them. Nirvana sends a lawyer to every boneyard trial to argue that everyone has neutral good in them. This results in Nirvana getting a number of souls that may have neutral good in them, but are, not conventionally neutral good, or at all people you'd want to have wandering your paradise. The isle that houses them is not in fact infinite, but Sarenrae, while she still possessed any power at all, would not let it be false, that there was space in Nirvana for everyone, that it would turn away none of them. She would die making it true, should it ever come up.
Some evil gods have probably considered whether it would be funny to make her do that, but it'd take a truly ludicrous number of souls. And if Pharasma's sorting were subverted on that scale, she would likely object. A few mostly evil souls won by Sarenrae's Isle doesn't seem to bother Pharasma any more than the tenth that many souls who end up maledicted. They're a statistically small fraction, and both varieties of soul end up good and evil in time. But wholesale relocation of mostly evil dead to good planes probably would impinge on what the gods guess to be Pharasma's own priorities. Or at least some of her rare interventions seem to have been aimed at not that long ago in the beginning.
Asmodeus is predictably not going to give in to a threat even if that kills him. Mostly that makes entities not try it. And this is obviously the work of Iomede, who he knows does not want the world to end, and so no one will give in. If, bafflingly, she's arranged for a sufficient coalition to side with her, well, Asmodeus too can play the game of doing things against his interests that harm the other party more, if that's the stupid game they're playing. He'll release Rovagug and order all the souls in hell shattered before any saviors can reach them.
Iomide is busy eating Zonkuthon, but not too busy to make legible that she has done absolutely no acting against her interests at any point, ate Zonkuthon on Milani's claim it was a good idea for her, and opposes the destruction of creation very vehemently. She was guessing that Keltham would be crushed on ascension. She would have impeded Keltham herself if she'd possessed unencumbered knowledge of his plans, and if she'd expected that no one else would stop him. She requests that Asmodeus act with such scraps of civilization as are in him, and not spitefully destroy everything while they figure out if there's something else to be done instead. She can actually see now, of her own unencumbered knowledge, how this ought to resolve, from the logic that threads through everything that has happened so far, but she's not going to tell Asmodeus that, because she hates him.
Sarenrae also requests clarification on the obvious point here, where this was clearly orchestrated by some parties. They can identify themselves if they want, or she can think for slightly longer and she'll figure it out, who are not allowed to do things like that, and who presumably don't want the universe destroyed, and who should have known that that is precisely what they were bringing about.
Of those gods that hovered around Keltham, who were once mortal enough to understand key parts of what has happened, Irori knows he may be the only one who can and will speak. He does not understand fully. He is coalesced and trying to think as quickly as he can, but gods are large but not fast, and he has not solved it all yet. He does not know why. But he knows who. Nethys. Caden Caelian.
And Milani, and he's not convinced not Iomide.
There is an exchange, then, of information among the gods gathered to confront this threat to all creation, in the parts of their wills not bent on probing Keltham's causal surface to sway him to another path by any possible input. Irori yields what he knows, taking responsibility for what must have been his part in bringing Carissa Sevar to this pass. Abadar gives it away, as a partial payment towards that owed for his protecting Keltham. Asmodeus selectively releases all of that information and only that information which damns that which is good, and they consider it and think and in time speak to Milani in voices that are one and many, Sarenrae and Slandrais, Gorum and Abadar, Gozre and Onos, Erastil and Dahak, Asmodeus and Desna. Your faction repeatedly intervened to protect Keltham, empower Keltham. None of you would have preferred that creation be destroyed rather than continue unchanged. You would have no motive to preserve and empower Keltham if we did not yield, so yield we must not, and you must certainly have known that we would not permit ourselves to be threatened by proxy, and that creation would be forfeit. Explain the actions of your coalition, Milani, and we hope that it is not the last explanation we all hear.
Our interests ought not be injured by our caring for them. We should do no worse out of these events than if we had been incapable of any action. We should do at least as well in expectation than if we had cared for nothing and done nothing. Then to understand all these events, you must understand what would have been the result if we had all done nothing. This then would have been the consequence of our null action.
If you wish to support this AI reading and others like it, please visit patreon.com/AskWhoCastsAI. Any help is appreciated. And thank you to executive producer John Doe 7776059